Hi, welcome to this video in the MRDCL Understanding Concepts series. And in this video we're going to look at go-to statements, if statements and if-then statements. You'll find the files referred to in this video in the folder PRJ106. So first of all I want to just take you through some data that I've got prepared so that you can see what happens to it when we use it in MRDCL. So in this record here we've got a serial number in 1 to 3 and then there's 4 fields that follow it. So we've got serial numbers 1, 2 and 3 in here, and I want you to imagine that these are just 4 yes/no questions where 1 is yes and 2 is no, and they should only answer the second and third of those if they answer 1. So this person answers 1 at the first question, 2 at the second, 1 at the third and 2 at the fourth. Now this one, because he answers 2 at the first one, he doesn't answer the next 2 because they're filtered on people who give a 1 at the first question but comes back for the fourth question to answer 1. And this respondent has a 2. He shouldn't or she shouldn't have answered the next 2 questions because only the people that said yes or code 1 should have answered those. So that's actually wrong or stray data, but has answered 1 for the fourth question. So that's the data we're going to work with in this very simple example. And you can look at different ways that you can handle this. Now the first thing to say is that if statements, go-to statements, if-then statements can be used equally in the data stage and the table stage. They work in exactly the same way. And the first example we've got here then is that we define question 1 as coming from the fourth field codes 1 and 2. And then there's a go-to statement that says unless Q1 is answer 1, go to the statement Q4. And here's the statement Q4. And the reason for that is we don't want to pick up anybody at question 2 and 3 unless they fulfill that condition of answer 1 at question 1. So that go-to is going to just jump round that piece of code if they didn't say yes at question 1. So what that will mean, if we go back to our data, is that this respondent who didn't give a 1 at this question will get this data effectively eliminated, or not literally deleted, but jumped or missed, so that it doesn't get picked up because they didn't fulfill the criteria for going on to answer these 2 questions. Back to our script. Now there's 3 different ways I can think of doing that, and possibly more. You can certainly use the negative of this. You could say if Q1 is not a 1, that would work equally well. You can also say that if Q1 is a 1, I'll just comment this out so we've got different ways of doing it. And then you'll have these in the file within the folder. So another way of doing this would be to use an if-then statement. So if Q1 is a 1, comma, then, comma, and then we would need an end if down here to say that this was the end of the condition of Q1 and 1, because question 4, we want everybody coming back into the question. So that's a second way of doing exactly the same thing. And of course the third way of doing it would just be to put a filter on each one of these variables and it would do the same thing, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that off in this particular case. So either of those 2 options that we've had, the unless go to or the if then end if construction, will remove the stray data. We can see that in action now. So if we run these tables, we can look at the tables, we can see that 3 people answered the first question, but when we got to the second question there's only 1 answer in there, even though another respondent actually answered that question. Now that leads on to the fact that this table should be filtered in some way. So let's just look at that in a minute and how we can deal with that. So there we go to table 3, and then back to question 4 where everybody comes back in because everybody answered that question. Now one way of dealing with that in the tables, of course, is to put an if on the front of this, and we'd probably put a base title in there as well. So that's one way of working. I'll just copy that. So that would be one way of working. If this was a larger bunch of tables that you were doing this on, you would probably again use an if then end if construction, or you might use a go to. So again we could say unless Q1 is a 1, go to T4, and we could put at T4 in here, and that would work absolutely fine and jump to the statement to T4 if they didn't fulfill that condition in the filter. If then would have worked in just the same way. If we've got a lot of tables and we've been worrying about base titles here, we could say something like this, base all, and then for these tables we might reset this as yes at Q1 so that the local base title applied to questions 2 and 3. And now if we run those tables, we should get our bases coming out right. 3 people at question 1, table 1, only 1 person at question 2, only 1 at question 3, and again everybody comes back in at question 4. And again we've removed those stray responses from the people who didn't say yes at question 1, but still went on to answer question 2 and question 3. Now, one of the advantages of filtering your variables is that when they get to the IDF, your data is clean. So that respondent who shouldn't have answered questions 2 and 3 will have clean data when they get to finished data. And that becomes important because if you ever export data, what gets exported from MRDCL is the data as it's written to the IDF. And if you didn't have that go to or the if then or a filter on the variable, you would have dirty data effectively being written to the IDF and output. If you output the data to SPSS, for example, those stray answers would carry through. So it is good practice to filter your variables so that they're clean in the data stage. Now there is another tool that you can use to filter tables automatically. I'm not especially keen on using it, but there is a format option called ANR. I'm going to take these options out. And what ANR does is it filters on all answering the variable. So as long as the variable is clean, everybody will go into the table. So let's just run it again. And you'll find that although I've got no filters on the table, it's based the table on the people who had an answer here. So only 1 person, when the variable was cleaned, after the filter was put on in the data stage, went into this data stage, into this variable, and therefore when we tabulated it, the base has automatically become 1 because it's filtered on all answering any of the rows. Now the only problem with ANR is if somebody didn't answer a particular question, they would get removed from the data. So if we went to our data here and let's take this respondent here, let's say they didn't answer question 2 and they were blank at this question, and we run it now, we can see now we've got an empty table 2 because all answering means they have to be in that variable rather than using the true base, which was people who said yes at question 1. So in those circumstances it would have been essential, or better anyway, to put an E on the end so that people who should have answered the question go into the variable Q2. And now if we look at Q2, we've got that 1 respondent back with a not stated there, and our table looks correct. So there has to be some care. You can use ANR, but you really should check that everybody gets into a variable somewhere. Otherwise, your ANR will actually start to remove records. Now, it may be what you want. You maybe only want to base tables on people who are given an answer to it, but if you didn't want that, that might cause a complication. So I hope that was useful. This variables cover the topic of go to and if statements and if then statements in MRDCL. I hope you found use from this video. Thank you.